So this is Contemporary Chinese, Revised Edition, Volume 2, Lesson 5, Part 1, Words and Expressions. So we're starting off with the word for season, 季节, 季节. So that's just a generic word for seasons. In relation to Melbourne, there is a saying I think a lot of people who live in Melbourne know, which in English is 4 seasons in one day. And in Chinese that is 一天, just wait for that to come up, 四季, 一天四季. So there's the ji from 季节 for seasons, one day, 4 seasons. Chinese themselves have an expression when they're talking about all year round. So they sometimes say 一年四季, meaning the whole year, 4 seasons of the year, but it can mean doing something throughout the whole year. We also have the specific words for the seasons. So we have spring, 春天, summer, 夏天, autumn, 秋天, and winter, 冬天. You'll see sometimes, particularly in written pieces, instead of writing, for example, 春天, they will write 春季, 春季. So literally the spring season, and that also applies for summer, autumn, and winter. 夏季, 秋季, 冬季. So when they use ji instead of tian, it's more formal. Generally, when they're speaking, most Chinese would just use 春天, 夏天, 秋天, and 冬天, rather than using ji. So we're now moving on to some words to describe the seasons and the weather as well. And we start off with hot, 热, 热. Just note with the pronunciation of that, it's not quite like the English R. The tongue is placed against the top of the palate a little bit further back. 热, 热. So that's the adjective for hot. We have warm, 暖和, 暖和. The character there, I guess, that we've got to pay most attention to is the second character, because we've learned that previously as 和, 和, to mean and. I think a lot of us will have also seen it in the word for peace. 和平, 和平. I might just write that there so that you can learn that one. 和平, 和平. So that equals peace. But here the pronunciation is different. It's 和, 和 in the neutral tone. 暖和, 今天很暖和. Another example, 今天不热, 今天很暖和. So moving on, we now have the word for cool. So this is one I'll need to explain a bit more in a minute. The pronunciation is 凉快, 凉快. And I guess the key word there is 凉. So it's interesting, when you say 凉快 with those two characters together, when the Chinese say it, they mean cool in a good sense. So in the summer in China, in some places, it is incredibly hot. It's as hot as the hottest parts of Southeast Asia, and often it's continually hot for several months. And so when some change to the weather happens, or they go somewhere where the temperature is lower, they will talk about 凉快. It's cool in a positive sense. Whereas sometimes we might mean cool in the sense of a little bit negative. It's not cold, but it's a little on the cool side. Cool. Also, though, interestingly, on the mainland, when native speakers use just 凉 on its own, if they say 有点凉, then when it's used on its own like that, it can mean in the negative sense that, in other words, it's a bit more towards being cold. But 凉快 on its own means refreshingly cool. We have the actual word for cold, 冷, 冷, and you'll notice with both the word cold, 冷, and cool, 凉快, that the first character on the left-hand side both have the same radical, which is, I think, the ice radical. Okay, this next one, listen. I'm sure we've learned that before. 听, 听. So that's just a straight verb to listen. Back to the weather. So we have the actual word for weather, which is 天气. 天气. Here, 天 doesn't really mean day so much as it means skies or heaven, but probably skies, obviously, in the weather context. We then have 预报. 预报 for forecast. So if you break that word down a little bit, the 预 is the for part. In other words, it's looking ahead to the future, and 报 is a report. So it is literally like a future report or a forecast. And then when it's used in the context of weather, then the whole expression is 天气预报. And for example, often people will say, oh, 今天的天气预报说. We know the verb 说, and then they will go on to say what the weather report says. So, 今天的天气预报说. Just wait for that to catch up. And then whatever it is that the weather report says about the weather today. Then we come down to, so one of the things that we'll talk about often in a 天气预报 is the weather, the weather, the temperature, and that is 温度, 温度. Again, if you break that word down, they give you the second part of it a bit further down under number 15, 度 meaning degree, and in China, degree actually refers to Celsius. So they talk in terms of Celsius as we do here. The 温 part means, 温 means warm. And I think maybe it's further down in this list or on the next vocab list, but there's the word 温暖, 温暖, which means warmth in a number of different ways. It can mean warmth in terms of actual, physical warmth of the weather and so on. But it can also mean warm in terms of human feeling. Now, the 温 we can see, let me just get my little thing here. So this is taking this 温 here in number 13 and combining it with the 暖 up in 7. 温暖 meaning warmth, both in terms of temperature and in terms of human emotion. So we come to our next word, which is low. 低, 低. We, I think, already know the word for high, which is 高, 高. So in the weather reports, sometimes you will hear them talking about 最低温度. And I think that comes up in the dialogues too. 最低, sorry, let me skip this. 最低温度 or 最高温度. So I'm pretty sure you can work out what that is. So 最低温度 is the minimum, and 最高温度 is the maximum. So one way they would say it is, for example, 今天的天气预报说最低温度10度，最高温度20度. So they use the 度 with a number before it to express how many degrees Celsius. So, and again, if you look at the terminology 最低 温度, the 最低 obviously means the lowest, and 温度 temperature, 最高 the highest. But generally in English, we'll refer to that as the minimum and the maximum. So moving on from those expressions, we're coming, well, I guess whenever we're talking about the degree of anything, sometimes we can't talk about it in absolute precise terms, whether it's numbers of people or length of time or age or, as in this case, temperature. So we've learned the expression, an expression in Chinese before for about or around, and I'm not sure if you can remember it, but it was 大概. 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 So that means about or approximately. Now, if you recall, 大概 actually is put before the word that it's modifying. So you might say, I think we had a dialogue back in Chinese 1 where they were talking about the number of students and they were saying it was approximately 30,000. 大概3万学生. Or you could say 3万个学生. But the 大概 comes before the quantity. If you were talking about when something happened, you might say, you know, 大概昨天 was maybe roughly yesterday. If you're talking about age, you might say 他大概15岁. So the point I'm trying to get across is that the 大概 comes before the quantity, length of time, the age, whatever it is that it's modifying. This new one that we're learning here, this new about or around, firstly it's pronounced 左右. 左右. Now I think you guys should actually know what those two characters mean. 左, left, can't see my hand here, I'll do it this, that's going to look wrong. Left and right. 左右. That means about. Now, what's important in terms of the difference with 大概 is that the 左右 comes after the thing it's modifying. So you might say, 今天的温度大概15度. If you use this new expression, you would say 今天的温度15度左右. So it comes after the quantity, the time, the age that it's modifying. And it's actually an interesting term if you think about it. When it means around a particular number, if you think about it, it actually literally means it's to the left or to the right of that number which represents a quantity or whatever. So that's 左右. We then move on to a noun, 暖气. 暖气, which means heating. If you look at the characters specifically, 暖 means warm, 气 means air. So for the Chinese, heating is warm air. Why has it got central in the brackets? Possibly not as much these days, but certainly in the old days, whenever you had a block of apartments, quite often there would be a central boiler room down in the basement of the block of apartments, and that would pump heat through hot water pipes throughout the whole building. So the heating was central in that sense. Also, in some cases where there was a group of residential buildings in a fairly small area, sometimes they would have a central heating house, if you like. It's like a pump station, but with hot water boilers and so on in it, and then they would pump that hot water out from that central boiler room to all of the buildings, and that's how they got their heating. A lot of people these days in China have air conditioners, mainly for the times when the 最高温度很高 or 非常热的时候. But I think also too now, because a lot of them are the dual heating cooling type, people will also turn them on in the winter. So that's 暖气. Moving on, we have our next word, which is hometown. 家乡. 家乡. So if you look at it, 家 we already know, meaning home or family. 乡, the second character here, means village. So Chinese people think about their hometown often in terms of their home village. It may not necessarily be a village these days. Certainly historically it may be. These days it could be a big city, but it's still referred to as their 家乡. Generally also when mainlanders talk about 家乡, they're not talking so much about the country as a whole. They're talking about the specific place that they originally came from. And people in mainland China do often tend to move quite a long way from where they were born, where they grew up, for all sorts of reasons, but these days often for employment reasons. Our next word is 比. 比. The explanation here on the words and expressions list is totally inadequate. I won't go into it too much now, but basically what it's used to do is to make comparison. So if you wanted to say, for example, this, whatever it is bigger than that, you would say, let me just, 这个房子 this house 比那个房子大. So this house is bigger than that house. So the 比 has a very specific function. So when they say that, yeah, well, I don't know. Anyhow, you'll see this in the dialogues and also in the grammar examples later on. But just remember, it's used for comparison. And then also we have the next one, 更, which means more. So you might say this is even more better. Now, in English, I know we don't say more better. That's bad English. What we say is that this is even better than, or just better than. So you could say, now it's used in combination with be. So you could say not only what we said before, 这个房子比那个房子更比那个房子大. We could say 这个房子比那个房子更大. So this house is even bigger than the other house.